There's a silent kind of exhaustion that few people dare to name. It's not just tiredness or stress, it's the feeling of drifting through life as if you're watching it from behind glass. The world keeps moving, but something inside you has gone dim. You wake up, you function, you endure, yet a part of you is quietly fading. And the most unsettling part, no one seems to notice how quickly your spark is burning out. But this experience isn't random. It has a psychology of its own, a set of inner patterns, beliefs, and emotional wounds that slowly shape a person into someone who isn't just tired, but tired of existing. Understanding this psychology is the first step to feeling alive again. Inner exhaustion doesn't appear suddenly. It's a slow, quiet erosion that happens long before a person realizes something has gone wrong. It begins with subtle emotional pressures that built up over the years, until the mind reaches a point where simply existing feels like a weight too heavy to carry. At its core, this exhaustion is shaped by a combination of internal expectations, learned beliefs, and the gradual depletion of psychological resources. For many people, this state can be traced back to the invisible expectations placed on them early in life. As children, they may have been taught, directly or indirectly, that their worth depends on how well they perform, behave, or meet the needs of others. They grow up believing they must earn love through achievement, perfection, or self-sacrifice. Over time, this belief becomes a mental script. You must be strong, you must not fail, you must keep going no matter what. And so they do, until their emotional energy quietly runs out. Another powerful origin of inner fatigue is chronic emotional suppression. When someone learns to silence their own feelings to avoid conflict, disappointment, or rejection, those unspoken emotions don't disappear. They accumulate. They weigh the person down from within, creating a kind of psychological heaviness that is difficult to name. After years of pretending to be fine, the mind starts to shut down as a form of self-protection. The person no longer feels deeply because feeling has always been punished or ignored. Chronic anxiety also plays a major role. When the mind is constantly in a state of hyper-alertness, analyzing, predicting, anticipating potential threats, it burns energy the same way a body burns calories during intense physical exertion. The difference is that this mental strain is invisible. A person may seem calm on the outside, yet inwardly exhausted from the continuous effort of holding themselves together. Eventually, the body and mind respond by numbing themselves, creating a sense of emptiness rather than overwhelm. Disappointment is another root that slowly grows into emotional exhaustion. People invest years into their careers, relationships, or personal dreams, believing that fulfillment is just one milestone away. But when those expectations collapse, when the work feels meaningless, the relationship becomes draining, or the goals lose their shine, something inside them breaks. They begin to wonder whether all their effort ever mattered. This disillusionment can hollow a person out from the inside, replacing hope with quiet resignation. And finally, the modern world itself contributes to inner fatigue. Constant comparison, pressure to be productive, and the noise of information overload overwhelm the mind's natural rhythms. The brain is overstimulated, yet emotionally undernourished. Life becomes a cycle of doing instead of being, and within that cycle, a person slowly loses connection to themselves. Inner exhaustion is not a flaw.
It is the result of carrying too much for too long. Understanding where it comes from is the first step toward easing the weight.
The psychology of someone who is tired of existing is not shaped by weakness, laziness, or lack of willpower. It is shaped by an internal world that has been quietly eroding over time. This erosion affects how a person thinks, feels, and reacts, not dramatically, but subtly, almost imperceptibly. To the outside world, they may appear functional, reliable, even stable, but internally, their mind operates by a very different logic, built on exhaustion rather than vitality. One of the most defining psychological traits of this state is emotional numbness. Not the dramatic numbness shown in movies, but a soft, persistent dullness. It's the sense that emotions used to move freely: joy, sadness, excitement, fear. But now they arrive muted, as if filtered through thick glass. The person doesn't necessarily feel nothing, they simply feel less. Moments that once sparked warmth now feel lukewarm. Achievements that once created pride feel like checked boxes. Conversations that once felt meaningful now feel like routines. It's not indifference, it's depletion. A second hallmark is relentless self-criticism. People who are tired of existing often hold themselves to a standard they would never impose on anyone else. Their internal monologue is harsh, demanding, unforgiving. Every mistake becomes evidence of inadequacy. Every success feels undeserved. Every setback becomes a personal failure rather than a natural part of life. This inner critic doesn't shout, it whispers, constantly. It drains confidence, motivation, and joy, replacing them with quiet self-doubt. A third element is a deep withdrawal into the inner world, not because the person hates others, but because being around people requires emotional energy they no longer possess. Social interactions become mentally taxing. Small talk feels empty. Even with loved ones, they may feel detached, as if they are present physically but floating somewhere far away mentally. They retreat not to punish others or themselves, but because isolation feels like the only place where their exhaustion isn't questioned or misunderstood. There is also a unique type of time distortion that shapes their psychology. Days blend into each other. Weeks go by unnoticed. The person isn't bored, they are disconnected from the flow of life. Time stops feeling like a path and becomes more like a fog. There is little anticipation for the future and little reflection on the past. Life becomes a loop of responsibilities and routines with no emotional markers to differentiate one moment from the next. This creates the feeling of drifting, of life passing, while the person stands still. Another psychological layer is what can be called philosophical fatigue, a sense of inner emptiness that comes not from dramatic despair, but from the quiet belief that nothing really changes. These individuals often become thinkers, observers, analysts of life rather than participants. They question the meaning of their actions, their goals, their purpose. They may not necessarily feel hopeless, they simply stop seeing a compelling why behind the effort. The mind becomes a place of contemplation but not creation, reflection but not renewal. This state often leads to a collapse of motivation, not because the person doesn't want to improve their life, but because the gap between intention and action feels impossibly wide. Everyday tasks require immense mental energy. Replying to messages, completing chores, starting new projects,
even making small decisions. They may procrastinate, not from laziness, but because their internal resources are depleted. Their mind chooses the path of least resistance, the quiet, the familiar, the emotionally neutral. Yet beneath all these patterns lies something even deeper, a hidden fear of burdening others. People who feel tired of existing usually hide their state remarkably well. They become experts at pretending. They smile, they nod, they say, "I'm okay," even when they are internally collapsing. They don't want pity, attention, or dramatic reactions. They want understanding without intrusion, presence without pressure. So they suppress their pain, believing that sharing it would only make them a weight on someone else's shoulders. A complex aspect of their psychology is the loss of personal identity. When someone has spent years meeting expectations, suppressing needs, or surviving on autopilot, they slowly disconnect from who they truly are. They forget what they enjoy. They stop dreaming. They no longer know what they want beyond the basics of survival. Their sense of self becomes undefined, not broken, simply blurred. They function, but they do not feel like a complete person. Another crucial psychological pattern is disrupted attention. The mind of someone who is emotionally exhausted becomes fragmented. Concentration becomes difficult, not because of distraction, but because the brain is constantly operating in low-energy mode. Tasks feel heavier. Ideas feel harder to hold. The person becomes mentally foggy, moving through thoughts as if moving through water. This mental fog reinforces the sense of detachment from work, from people, from life itself. There is also a unique type of time distortion that shapes their psychology. There is little anticipation for the future and little reflection on the past. Life becomes a loop of responsibilities and routines with no emotional markers to differentiate one moment from the next. This creates the feeling of drifting, of life passing, while the person stands still. Another crucial psychological pattern is disrupted attention. The mind of someone who is emotionally exhausted becomes fragmented. Concentration becomes difficult, not because of distraction, but because the brain is constantly operating in low-energy mode. Tasks feel heavier. Ideas feel harder to hold. The person becomes mentally foggy, moving through thoughts as if moving through water. This mental fog reinforces the sense of detachment from work, from people, from life itself. There is also a quiet and often unspoken component, envy of simplicity. They look at people who seem energetic, joyful, engaged with life, and wonder what it must feel like. They may wish they could return to earlier versions of themselves, versions that laughed more easily, dreamed more boldly, cared more freely. This longing is not bitterness, it is grief for a self that feels lost. Yet, paradoxically, people in this state often possess high emotional intelligence. They understand others deeply. They sense tension, pain, sadness, even when unspoken. They are often empathetic, supportive, perceptive, qualities that made them take on more emotional weight than they could handle. Their exhaustion is not a sign of emotional weakness, but emotional overuse. At the center of all this lies a core psychological truth. They're not tired of life. They are tired of living without feeling alive. They long for connection, meaning, ease, presence, purpose. They long for a moment of genuine warmth, a spark of excitement, a sense that their existence is not just an obligation, but an experience. To To understand the psychology of someone who is tired of existing is to understand a mind that has carried too much, felt too little, been too strong for too long. It is a psychology shaped by overload, silence, and unmet emotional needs. And beneath that exhaustion lies a quiet hope, the hope that life can still feel real again.
Hidden exhaustion rarely announces itself directly. It doesn't always come with dramatic breakdowns or visible crises. Instead, it reveals itself through subtle behaviors, small shifts in habits, reactions, and routines that slowly paint a picture of a person who is quietly struggling. These behaviors may seem minor or harmless on the surface, but together they create a silent language that expresses what words cannot. One of the earliest signs is a gradual avoidance of social interaction. This doesn't mean the person becomes antisocial or hostile. Instead, they begin to withdraw gently, declining invitations, shortening conversations, avoiding group settings. Even a simple phone call can feel mentally heavy. They may still care deeply about the people in their lives, but engaging with others requires emotional energy they no longer have. They don't pull away out of rejection, they pull away out of survival. Alongside this comes a tendency to delay even important tasks. The person may postpone responsibilities, deadlines, and decisions, not out of laziness, but because their internal energy is depleted. A small task like answering an email can feel overwhelming. Paying a bill, scheduling an appointment, or cleaning a room becomes a mountain rather than a molehill. Their mind seeks to conserve energy by avoiding anything non-essential, even when they logically understand the consequences of delay. Another revealing behavior is the decline of basic self-care. They may begin neglecting sleep, eating irregularly, or letting their living space fall into disarray. To an outside observer, this might appear careless, but it usually reflects a deeper truth. Their internal system is running on minimum effort mode. When simply existing feels tiring, maintaining routines becomes a challenge. Even tasks they once performed effortlessly now feel like burdens. Many people in this state shift into autopilot mode. They continue fulfilling obligations, going to work, attending classes, managing responsibilities, but they do so mechanically. Their actions are functional, but emotionally disconnected. They follow routines without feeling present in them. Days blur together because nothing feels distinct. They are living but not living fully, doing but not experiencing. Another subtle but telling sign is changes in emotional expression. They may become unusually quiet or unusually irritable. A person who previously expressed themselves openly may now respond with brief, restrained answers. Or they may snap over small inconveniences that wouldn't normally bother them. The irritability is not anger at others. It's the frustration of carrying internal weight without relief. Meanwhile, their silence is not indifference. It is conservation of the little energy they have left. People who are secretly exhausted often seek ways to mentally disconnect. They might spend long hours scrolling through social media, watching videos, sleeping excessively, or immersing themselves in games or series. These activities provide a temporary escape, a way to stop thinking, feeling, or dealing with inner heaviness. It's not addiction, it's coping. These distractions create small pockets of numbness, which for someone exhausted can feel like relief. Another behavioral sign is a reduced capacity for decision-making. Choices that once seemed simple, what to wear or what to eat, what task to start, suddenly feel paralyzing. It's not indecision for its own sake, it's mental fatigue. When the mind is exhausted, decisions feel like demands. The person may default to the easiest option or avoid choosing altogether, because every decision feels like it draws from a well that is already nearly empty. There is also a noticeable decline in enthusiasm. Activities they once loved Hobbies, passions, routines lose their spark. A person who used to paint, read, play music, or explore may now find themselves uninterested or too tired to engage. The loss of joy doesn't mean the activity changed. It means the emotional fuel behind it has run dry. They may even feel guilty about this loss, wondering why they can't enjoy what once nourished them. Hidden exhaustion can manifest as overthinking as well. Their thoughts loop endlessly, repeating worries, regrets, or hypothetical scenarios. They replay conversations, overanalyze small issues, prepare for problems that may never occur. This mental overactivity is the mind's attempt to maintain control when emotional energy is lacking. Ironically, it drains them even further, feeding the cycle of exhaustion. Another revealing behavior is increased sensitivity to noise, conflict, or stimulation. Loud environments, arguments, interruptions, or chaotic spaces become overwhelming. Their threshold for stress decreases dramatically. It's not that they've become fragile, it's that their internal resources are overstretched. Even minor disruptions feel magnified because their internal resources are already stretched thin. In relationships, hidden exhaustion often appears as a shift toward minimal emotional expression. They may struggle to articulate their feelings, not because they don't trust others, but because explaining themselves feels too tiring. When asked what's wrong, they may say, "I don't know," because genuinely, they can't untangle the internal knots long enough to form an explanation. Their silence is not secrecy, it is exhaustion distilled into words. Some people adopt hyper-independence as a coping mechanism. They avoid asking for help even when they clearly need it. They don't want to impose, inconvenience, or appear weak. They tell themselves, "I can handle it," even when they're running on empty. This independence is not confidence, it's fear of burdening others and a belief that their struggles must remain unseen. Another behavior that reveals hidden exhaustion is a strong reliance on routines, but not out of discipline. Routines become a lifeline because they eliminate the need to make decisions. Waking up, going to work, coming home, repeating the same activities day after day creates a sense of predictability that feels safe. The routine becomes a shield against emotional overwhelm, even if it leads to a feeling of monotony. Some people begin to display small escape fantasies, not extreme or dangerous ones, but quiet thoughts about disappearing for a while, taking a long break, moving somewhere remote, or pressing a pause button on life. These fantasies aren't a desire to stop living, they are a desire to stop struggling. They imagine distance, silence, rest. It's the mind's way of saying, "I need space to breathe." A final and very subtle sign is masking, the ability to appear fine when internally drained. They laugh at the right moments, smile when expected, perform socially acceptable responses. Their mask can be convincing, even flawless. They do it to avoid questions, to protect others, or simply because they've learned to survive by hiding their pain. But behind the mask, the fatigue remains. All these behaviors, when observed together, create a portrait of someone who was silently fighting an internal battle. Not a dramatic one, but a quiet, persistent struggle to maintain a sense of normalcy while feeling emotionally depleted. Their exhaustion is hidden not because they want to deceive others, but because they have learned to endure in silence. These behaviors do not reflect a lack of strength. They reflect a person who has been strong for far too long. And sometimes recognizing these signs is the first step towards helping someone or oneself find the way back to real rest, real connection, and a life that feels alive again.
Reclaiming the feeling of being alive is not about sudden breakthroughs or dramatic transformations. It is not about forcing yourself to be positive or pretending everything is fine. Instead, it is a slow, gentle process, a process of turning back toward yourself after years of turning away. To begin feeling alive again, a person must first understand that life is not regained through pressure, but through presence. The journey back is not heroic, it is human. One of the first steps is reconnecting with the body, because emotional exhaustion often disconnects a person from physical experience. The body becomes something to drag from task to task, rather than a place to live in. To reconnect, start small, noticing your breathing, stretching when you wake up, standing in the sunlight for a moment before beginning your day. These simple acts remind the nervous system that you exist not just in your thoughts, but in your physical, living form. The body anchors the mind, and when the body receives care, the mind slowly follows. Another essential step is reducing internal expectations. Many people who are tired of existing carry a mental load built from years of must, should, and have to. Their self-worth became tangled with productivity, performance, and perfection. To reclaim vitality, they must learn to release this invisible pressure. This means practicing doing things imperfectly, leaving tasks unfinished when necessary, and allowing themselves rest without guilt. When the mind stops demanding constant excellence, it makes space for genuine desire, curiosity, and emotional openness to return. A powerful technique for restoring a sense of aliveness is reintroducing micro-joys, tiny, effortless pleasures that require no justification and no achievement. These moments might be enjoying the smell of fresh air, listening to a favorite song from the past, sipping a drink slowly, or touching something with an interesting texture. Micro-joys reconnect the brain with small doses of dopamine and sensory pleasure. They remind a person that life is not only made of big milestones, but also of quiet, intimate moments that nourish the heart. Equally important is learning to acknowledge emotions instead of suppressing them. People who are exhausted often push their feelings away because they fear being overwhelmed. But suppressed emotions do not disappear. They become heavy and silent. Reclaiming life involves noticing emotions without judgment: frustration, sadness, numbness, tenderness, hope. Simply observing them, naming them, or expressing them in writing can release a surprising amount of inner tension. Emotional expression is not a luxury, it is a way back to oneself. Another vital step is creating slow moments of presence. The modern world pushes people to move quickly, think quickly, decide quickly, but a tired mind cannot heal in speed. Moments of intentional slowness, walking without headphones, washing dishes without rush, sitting quietly for a few minutes, help restore mental clarity. When the mind slows down, it becomes sensitive again. It begins to feel, notice, and connect with the world around it. Presence is one of the most powerful antidotes to inner emptiness. Reclaiming aliveness also requires rebuilding a gentle connection with others, even in small ways. Exhaustion often leads to isolation, but humans are not meant to live only in their heads. This doesn't mean forcing deep conversations or social obligations. It means simple, soft moments of connection. Sending a brief message, sharing a quiet meal, sitting near someone you trust without needing to perform. These tiny interactions remind the exhausted mind that connection can be safe, light, and nourishing. Another important part of this journey is redefining purpose. Many people feel tired of existing because their goals no longer reflect who they are. They chase dreams that belonged to their past self, or they live according to the expectations of others. To feel alive again, a person must explore what genuinely matters to them, not in grand philosophical terms, but in human, grounded ones. What brings a sense of meaning? What sparks curiosity? What inspires even the smallest flicker of passion? Purpose doesn't appear overnight. It grows from tiny seeds of interest and honesty. Reclaiming life often requires learning to take pauses without guilt. Many people push themselves until they collapse emotionally, believing that rest must be earned. But true rest is not a reward, it is a necessity. Taking breaks, slowing down, and allowing yourself to stop are acts of self-preservation. Rest is where the mind repairs itself. It is where creativity returns. It is where emotional resilience is rebuilt. Without rest, no amount of effort can restore vitality. A critical element of returning to life is self-compassion. For years, many people treated themselves with judgment, impatience, or harshness. To feel alive, they must learn to treat themselves the way they would treat someone they love, with kindness, curiosity, and forgiveness. Self-compassion is not weakness, it is the foundation of emotional healing. When a person stops fighting against themselves, they create space for internal peace to grow. Another transformative practice is re-engaging with curiosity. Exhaustion often turns life into routine, but curiosity disrupts that cycle. Ask small questions. What if I tried something new? What if I explored a different path home? What if I returned to an old hobby? Curiosity is a spark, a gentle awakening of the mind. It leads a person out of stagnation and into possibility. A deeply healing step is allowing yourself to be imperfectly human. People who are tired of existing often carry shame for their exhaustion, believing they should be stronger or more resilient. But aliveness comes from embracing the full range of the human experience, the energy and the fatigue, the clarity and the confusion, the confidence and the doubt. To feel alive means to allow yourself to be unfinished, evolving, flawed, and real. Finally, reclaiming the feeling of life requires patience with the process. Emotional energy does not return in a single moment. It resurfaces gradually, like sunlight after a long winter. Some days the person may feel progress, other days they may feel stuck. But healing is not linear, and presence grows through repetition. Each small act of care, each moment of connection, each breath of awareness is a step toward aliveness. At the heart of it all lies a simple truth. You don't reclaim life by forcing it. You reclaim life by gently returning to yourself. This chapter is not a map to perfection or a blueprint for success. It is an invitation to soften, to notice, to rest, to reconnect. And little by little, through these small, human acts, the feeling of being alive begins to return.